Hello there and welcome. The first four videos have been about outlining the problems and the destructive dynamics that have always persisted in Game A. And quite frankly, I could have made 100 videos about problems with Game A, but the point is that all of those 100 videos, you'd ultimately be able to trace the source of the problem back to some combination of those three dynamics that I've laid out. So future videos are going to be about how to tackle those dynamics. Before I go any further, I need to introduce the notion of the generator function. This is an incredibly powerful idea. The Mandelbrot set that I showed you in the last video, it's a shape, it's an infinitely complex shape, and what is zoomed in on is the boundary of that shape. Now that shape is created by the running of one very simple function. Here it is, z goes to z squared plus c. And so this idea of a simple thing iterated lots of times being able to create something as magnificent and as complex as the Mandelbrot set is, for me at least, a really key idea. I mean, this is my personal perspective on Game B. Other people involved in the Game B project have very different perspectives, and that's not only okay, it's actually great. It's a strength, and that's one of the things that this video is about. So bear in mind that this is my personal perspective on it, but if you accept the notion that human society is a complex system and that each of us as individuals are nodes in that system, then the culture, the society as a whole, is the sum of all of the generator functions run by those nodes in the network, right? And so if we are all running rivalrousness and responsiveness to broadcast modality and an insistence on using complicatedness, then that is the society, that is the culture that we will build and that we will manifest. If there is some way to change the generator functions and push those to the side, or at least strongly de-emphasize them and replace them, then Game B comes about as a consequence of that. So that's the context that I would like to put the rest of this video into. And now I'm going to talk about rule omega itself. And in order to do that, I'm going to use an extremely simple example to make the point that I want to make. And so if you can envisage a cylinder, the shape of a cylinder, and then you've got two people looking at that cylinder, one from the side on and one from above. The one looking from the side sees a rectangle, right? The one looking from above sees a circle, and they would both swear to a court in law, swear in a court of law that I'm seeing a rectangle, I'm seeing a circle. And there's one of two ways that this can play out. They can either spend however long arguing with each other, you're an idiot, don't you know a circle when you see one, or they can accept the possibility that maybe there's a deeper truth here that neither of them are grasping, right? And that if they can find a way of effectively combining their perspectives, perhaps they can achieve that deeper understanding, right? So that's the heart of rule omega. Everybody has valid perspective, right? It goes both ways. I have valid perspective to bring to this situation, but I also understand that my perspective is incomplete. Equally, you have a valid point of view to bring to this problem or situation, but yours is also incomplete, right? And so if we can find a way to enter into a dialogue such that we can understand and enter into the other's perspective while at the same time hanging on to our own, not abandoning our own, then there is an opportunity for deeper truth to be grasped that neither of us could grasp on our own. Another important aspect of rule omega is the idea of humility. So you're not turning up in the conversation to say what you've already got in your head, right? It's not like a normal conversation where oftentimes you're sitting waiting for a pause so that you can say what you've already got in your mind to say, right? No, it's more about you offer yourself up as a humble vessel through which that which wishes to be expressed can be expressed. And so this can be extremely difficult. I mean, rule omega on the one hand is very simple. I'm going to explain it in 5 minutes. On the other hand, though, it's extremely difficult. It requires a good degree of honest self-examination and humility and dealing with your shit, basically, before you can be an effective engager in this kind of interaction. Rule omega is something that you do. It's not something you talk about. I know I'm sitting here talking about it now, but I would say one of the key skills that is required for rule omega is discernment. And I mean this in two ways. Firstly, what I've already alluded to, that you're speaking from a place not of ego, not I wish to be seen, not I want to look clever, not I haven't spoken for a few minutes, it feels like it's my turn, not that kind of stuff. But when something that feels like it's right in the moment, that it's going to help and that it's going to expand the conversation, then that is when you speak. And this is extremely difficult, right? I mean, again, it's easy to say, it's much more difficult to do. The second part of discernment is the understanding that what the other person is expressing, they may not be expressing it very well, right? I mean, you're talking about difficult things, very possibly you're in territory that you've never been in before. And so try as you might, it's very possible you're not going to explain yourself as well as you might do, given a little bit of time to process it. And so my job as the listener is to, even though you're not saying it very well, to separate out the signal from the noise and home in on the signal. And then, okay, I think what you are trying to say is something like this, and I then say it back in such a way that maybe enables you to say it a little bit more clearly. And by this iterative process, we get to something, right? Now, this is, I put this in the situation of two people just to make it simple, but obviously the more perspectives that can be brought to these kinds of conversations, the more possibility there is for exploration and for deep uncovering of something new. I really like the analogy of the jazz band that I've heard Jamie and Jordan use in the past. So in a jazz band, you've got 4 or 5 people, whatever, sitting around riffing, jamming, and one of them sort of catches their ear, something catches their ear. Oh, I like that. I can do something with that. What do you think of this? And oh, yeah, that gives me an idea. This would go really well with this. How do you think these two things would gel together? And so on and so on and so on. And by this iterative process that I've just talked about, something amazing can emerge. I'd like to come back to kind of what I said at the beginning, that rule omega is potentially an incredibly powerful generator function, because it cuts off all three, the rivalrous, the complicated, and the broadcast, cuts them all off at the knees, right? It is fundamentally anti-rivalrous in the same way that the jazz band is. You can't turn up with your own agenda, right? I've got this thing that I want to do. Creation doesn't work like that, right? It doesn't. Nothing is going to emerge with that kind of mindset. So it's fundamentally anti-rivalrous, and not just anti, because you're creating things which none of you could have possibly created on your own. You're arriving places none of you could have got to on your own. And because you've created something new, it's soil on which more new things can be built afterwards. So it's absolutely anti-rivalrous. It's interfaces with the complex, because, a session of a dozen people, whatever, having a conversation, these are complex beings interacting in complex ways, right? And so complexity is stamped right into anything that emerges from that. And it is, as I said in an earlier video, the absolute antithesis of the broadcast modality, because there is no person in charge. There's no one setting an agenda. There's no top-down kind of structure whatsoever here. The other thing that's very cool about Rule Omega is that it's an actual thing that you can do, that any individual can start doing right now. Get a few people together, understand what Rule Omega about, and start practicing it. It'll feel weird and clumsy and whatever to start with, but if nothing else, it will improve your own personal relationships. But it's also an opportunity for, at an individual level, people to start feeling that they have a meaningful and important and immediate role to play in the transmutation of game A into game B. It can be a real source of frustration not to feel like you as an individual matter, but this is absolutely not the case, and the groups that you form will be potentially seeds for decentralized intelligence networks which can grow from them. So it's a real thing. It's not pie in the sky. I would particularly like to point you at the three-way conversation between Jamie Wheel, Jordan Hall, and Daniel Schmachtenberger that was on Rebel Wisdom a little while ago, again linked below, in which they talk about, among other things, Rule Omega. But what's cool about it is that they sort of embody its use during the conversation as well. So it's a really excellent place to start to explore these ideas a little bit further. So yeah, thank you very much indeed for watching all of these. This kind of concludes Game B 101 Foundation course. The future videos that I'm going to make are going to be about the protocols, the generator functions, and most importantly, the skills that we as individuals can begin to cultivate in order to make us better runners of those generator functions, and in doing so, game B will come about on its own. I mean, it's another feature of complex systems, is if you alter the generator functions that the nodes are running, the system will reorganize and a whole new system will emerge from that, right? And so if enough of us can change our generator functions, then the game changes as a consequence of that, right? Without having to actually change the game from the top down.